Matt and Thomas, welcome to the podcast. How about we start with a quick intro on yourself, your current roles, and your career track. Matt, how about you?
I graduated law school in 2011. I'm originally from Kansas City, went to undergrad in Arizona, and then went to law school at Stanford. Went to work at Latham doing antitrust litigation. Really enjoyed doing that, but I'd always wanted to clerk. Had an opportunity to do that in the Northern District here in San Francisco, and did that for a year. And then a friend of mine started this company, and this happened to be about self-driving cars, and said, hey, like I've got all these questions about the law, and my investors are asking me how I'm going to be able to actually operate this business. And I don't really know how to answer those, and I don't really want to think about them. So can you come do that? So I said yes, ended up becoming the first lawyer at Cruise, and grew with Cruise, had a great time doing that. And then about a year ago now, went and joined to lead the legal team at Forward. So that's what I've been doing for the last year. And yeah, that's my story.
Cool. And we'll get into what the experience was like at both of those companies. Thomas, how about you?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in South Carolina and also graduated law school in 2011, actually the same law school as Matt did, which is how we know each other. And after graduating from Stanford, I went on and I clerked for federal judges back in South Carolina and Atlanta, and then abroad in South Africa. And so I actually kind of focused my practice more on international stuff. I practiced at Freshfields in their DC office doing investigations work, kind of DOJ facing investigations work for a few years, and was looking to go into government in late 2016. And Matt at the same time happened to give me a call and said, hey, like, I know you were kind of poking around. Would you want to come join me back out here in San Francisco to help build this company, Cruise? So that was late 2016, early 2017. And so I became the second lawyer at Cruise, practiced there with Matt, built the team. And, he had such great things to say about Forward that about 6 months after he joined, I thought it would be a good idea to join with him.
That's awesome. And part of the appeal with having both of you guys on the podcast was that you guys are pals and you guys have been working together at two different companies. One of the cool parts about Cruise was just how fast you guys grew, the level of investment, selling within 4 years at such a big exit, and also just the overall mission. It's obviously really inspiring. And I think the cool part with you two is that you guys didn't seem like you guys were all in on tech, early on in law school or even after graduating, and you guys just stumbled upon this rocket ship that was growing like crazy. So Matt, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was wild. Like, just to put it briefly, is a period of rapid learning, basically consistently and perpetually. It's especially so at the beginning. Like I remember, you highlighted it very kindly of wasn't really all in on tech. Like I was doing large scale antitrust litigation, right. And I studied finance. I don't know anything about software. I use tech, sure. But you go into a company like this and you have to really quickly start to learn the lingo and hear about what matters to people. And at least in my experience, engineering is the function in a company that is the company. So you have to really learn how engineers think and talk and what they care about, what motivates them, et cetera. Yeah, it's just, I remember very early someone came and was like, hey, what license can I use for this? Am I allowed to use this piece of open source? And they're like, we want to use the GPL. None of those words made any sense to me. Like I knew the word license in the context of like Ticketmaster seat licensing, right? But obviously that wasn't what they were asking about. And you just kind of learn to nod your head and try to glean as much as you can from the context and then go quickly Google and get smart.
Thomas, what about you? How was it like for you?
I remember joining in January 2017 at Cruise. And coming from this, Freshfields is a UK-based law firm. I was in their DC office, coming from a kind of buttoned-up law firm environment, and figuring out even on the first day, what do you wear as a startup attorney? So I went with a green hoodie, but also the startup attorney uniform of a button-down and jeans to try to look informal. And I remember my first day, the office was this converted fabric warehouse, instead of a glossy glass and steel office building, and sitting at these long cafeteria lunch tables with this engineer who, because it was just chilly in January in San Francisco, he was wearing a full like Dr. Seuss Thing 2 costume. So here I was like trying to look like informal and approachable as a lawyer. It's my first day. And there's this guy wearing a Dr. Seuss costume sits down next to me for lunch. And then he proceeds to give me kind of 30 minutes of detailed explanation of like some of our sensor technology at the company, just trying to teach me what he does. And same thing, my retention on that was probably below 20% at the time. But I remember just sitting there thinking like, I am in a different world than I have been in.
Right.
And this is going to be a different kind of legal practice.
How do you guys think about your function in terms of facilitating rapid growth? What's a lawyer's role in that process from the perspective of a high growth startup that's growing like crazy with a really big legal team, or from a sole GC that's trying to run the show by themselves?
Yeah, I think Thomas probably will articulate it better than me, but in a startup like that, and especially in the ones we've worked in that are pretty highly regulated, your role is to help make things happen. Like people are coming to you and they say like, we don't know how to do this. Like there's some rules we know we need to do to kind of get out the gate. Can you help me find those rules? I don't even know what they are. What would apply to me? How do I do it? And so it's, some people may view that as it's just like a matter of framing or perception. But, I like to think of it that way, that I've looked around like holistically of what the company is trying to do. And I'm trying to help you make this happen. Like you may be an engineer or an ops person or in finance, but you've all got stuff that you're asking me and I'm helping you get your stuff done. What do you say, Thomas?
Yeah, I think that's broadly right. I think, that story I told about the lunchtime lecture on LiDAR technology, I think some of it is just that, realizing that the risk, and lawyers are taught to talk in terms of risk and things, for companies that are small and trying to grow, and especially in these highly regulated areas, there are risks all over the place, but there's also risk in not doing things, not stepping forward, right? Especially if you're sort of pre-acquisition or only have a limited runway in terms of funding. That's a different form of risk, the opportunity cost or whatever you call it, of not advancing your business. And so that's a different frame to approach problems. I think Matt kind of captured it.
At those earlier stages of Cruise, and now you guys are at Forward building your legal department up from the ground up, how do you guys deal with wearing multiple hats? There's a lot of people that are listening to the podcast that are a one-person legal team. They have to manage employment, privacy, contracts, advising the C-suite, and this might be their first, in-house job. How did you guys navigate that, especially if you don't have the luxury of just hiring as much as you want? Matt, how about you go?
Sure. Yeah, and I've been there. Like until I got Thomas, I was running around. Like the true story behind all this is Thomas actually does all the things, and I just make sure he's there.
You hired me to do the running around, yeah.
But yeah, I think so. On the sort of headcount, who's doing what point, I've learned to frame it in terms of trade-offs. Like there were points where I was able to hire people in the legal team and points where I couldn't. And on those latter periods of time, the way I would frame it is like, look, here we know, or I've helped identify like where risks are and the things we could do. And that can be done by lawyers, but often in a startup, most of the work that I am doing as a lawyer, like most of it could be done by somebody else. Like you can interact with outside counsel. I, of course, as the head of legal, I don't love that, but if I'm resource constrained, I can offshore that to you. For example, leases are a great place where if you've got somebody who is figuring out an office, they can talk to outside counsel and work with them. The outside counsel can negotiate, and it takes 5% of your time to review that work than actually do it all yourself. So that applies in lots of different areas. And maybe a precursor step is we tried to focus on building stuff that teams could use self-serve. So like, how can I hate to use this like phrase, but how can we teach people how to fish? And so those are two big things, like giving people resources to go on their own, and then also framing to your business leaders and your CEO, like, this is just a matter of how you want it done. And we found often the framework or the process that worked is, hey, for the first time, legal will go through this with you. Like if you're, in Cruz's case, like applying for a permit in a new state for a self-driving car, like legal will either do it or walk through it with you the whole time. But when you want to do that 500 times, we're going to say that doesn't make sense to pay lawyers to do that. Let's figure out a way that other folks can do it.
Thomas, what about you?
Yeah, Matt and I, because we're friends, I think some of what you'll catch is that we think about these things in similar ways, which is good to a point. Maybe we can talk about that too in the context of hiring. But before we get there, I just want to say like one thing that I've often sort of thought about as we approach the role and really admired in terms of how Matt does it is knowing sort of what the organization or what the company is ready for when. So even if you have some idea of what a super mature legal department would look like or a super mature company looks like across the range of things that you could be doing, knowing when is the right time based on the company's capabilities and priorities and personnel to start doing something that you need to do at some point. And that's just, kind of priority setting type thing, but can be really important to go from planning, not just based on sort of emergencies or even just triage, but instead figuring out, is this the optimal time to put in place this process? Because now my stakeholders, my leaders of the business will respond to the ask to do this now because some other reason, right? And so that's an element of kind of reading the audience a little bit too, for when you want to start doing things that you've kind of always known need to be done at some point.
Got it. So when I was doing my research, I saw you guys won an award for being the most innovative emerging company legal department. And I know you guys had a lot of people on the team within your legal department. What advice do you guys have for hiring? And how do you also think about the culture and tone that you're looking to set for new lawyers that are joining your company?
So I've been starting and saying all the first things that you were probably wanting to say and that I probably stole from you. So maybe, you start with this one.
Sure. So I think, we've kind of taken as an assumption a little bit that the audience, when we're talking about Cruz in particular, knows sort of the challenge where we were dealing with. And I just want to recap it. So when I joined Cruz, I was the second attorney. We also had a paralegal. And then 3.5 years later, by the time Matt and then I left, the company was like 1,900 people and the team was 20 plus. And so, that's really substantial and rapid growth. And so in terms of what we were looking for, there are obviously interpersonal things in culture that maybe Matt will address. But the two that I would always say when we were hiring, and if somebody asked me like in an interview, were comfort with change, because I can't tell you how many times Matt and I sat and like whiteboarded what is the structure of the team, who's reporting to whom, and how it's going to change over, month on month.
Right.
So comfort with change, because not only for those sort of team structure things, but also the business goals are constantly changing based on regulatory environment or pace of technical progress and so forth. In addition to that, just intellectual curiosity. We always found, or at least I always thought, that we were more successful when we hired people that were nerds about something, right? Like your paralegal who is really into space law or something like that and gets really deep into it. That's a good sign, because I think in terms of a culture for a legal team, what you want is that people who, when somebody comes to them and asks them a question, they don't just respond to that narrow question, but they instead follow up with why do you ask? Tell me more about this. And then your team develops more knowledge of what's going on in the business, develops the relationships so that people keep coming back to them. And it starts with that sort of spark of nerdiness or curiosity that can end up really informing the role of legal within the larger org.
Matt, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I'll see if I've got anything from different aspects of this. I mean, part of this is like when to hire, Thomas didn't really touch on that. Mm-hmm. And Thomas, you actually said this yesterday. So Forward is hiring an employment lawyer. To all you employment lawyers out there, listen to us, wonderful folks. You can come work with us. And so, Thomas, I think you said, you're like, we as a legal team, we need to be really hurting before we do that. I think that's a little bit far on the spectrum, but I do agree. You have to be able to make a solid case because, well, specifically for lawyers aren't cheap. You have to make the case for a lawyer, and assuming you're in a place where like people get what the legal function is about. That's what I'm saying. What I said earlier, like making things happen, that makes it a little bit easier for you, but you have to consistently fight that. So the people you hire need to embody that pretty quickly. Like, I'm here to help you make things happen. Anyway, I'm bouncing a little bit all over from like when to hire to what the person should act like when they get there. And it is a big change for a lot of people to think just as outside counsel, like you're a knowledge provider. People come to you for information about a thing, but you don't have to carry it through all the way. You don't have to make it happen, so to speak. So trying to search for that on the front end of who you're hiring. And then when the person gets there, like show that, demonstrate it, and like kind of just continually reiterate what our objectives are, which is to get the business to their objectives. So yeah, those are some additional things.
And I'll just piggyback on that. There, Matt broke it into sort of when to hire, and then the kind of person to select for, what to tell them in terms of how to act once they're in the company. And two things that struck me about that. One was like, it's worth being very selective in hiring and not to just feel the pain of, man, we need a person, but to tolerate that pain sometimes for a really long time to find the right person. Because when you're a team of 2 or 3, the downside cost of hiring a person who's not the right fit for your team is really significant, right? And so there's that. And then the other piece, and we spent a lot of time on this, both at Forward and at Cruise, is investing in orienting. So onboarding your own teammates, and then onboarding everyone else in the company who's going to be interacting with your team, spending a lot of time on our sort of onboarding presentations and stuff like that. That's like free money because you make that presentation or whatever really sharp, and then you can use it. And in the case of Cruise, educate 1,000 people over 2 years who are going to have a better sense of how to approach legal and what you do.
Those are some great points on hiring. So one of the questions that came in, we actually fielded some questions from some of our close GC friends prior to doing this. And one of the questions that came up is, how do you handle really complex regulatory issues when being in a new industry that you really don't have experience for? And I think you guys are perfect to answer that. Matt, how do you think about that from being at Cruise and self-driving and now to being in the medical space with Forward?
Sure. So I think to harken back to Thomas's comment of like this intellectual curiosity, this is the stuff that gets me excited. So I am a nerd about the law. And when I jumped into Forward and into Cruise, it was like, okay, let's pretend to be law students again and create the class for ourselves. Like, what is car law?
Right.
What is health law? And I should be clear. I did not become an expert in car law, and I'm not remotely there in terms of health law. But I think you've got to do as much reading as possible, and other things. So reading, talking to people in the space, going to conferences, and then just like seeing where you have gaps, like thinking about the buzzwords where you start to see things come up, go look them up and learn more about them. It's I'm trying to think of like other strategies I have employed. This is just to like get yourself to base camp where you feel like, okay, now I can actually talk to my quote unquote client about this thing. And it's interesting because sometimes you join a company and there's people who do know the law pretty well in their space. And that I think is helpful to a point, but you have to be careful. Like those people, sometimes people take things as like a given or as fact, or like this is what the law is. And you have to come to that opinion yourself. And, honestly, you have to lean on outside counsel to the extent you have budget for it. Like it's a bit of a trade. Like I've had these conversations with my CEOs, like, look, you hired me because you think I'm great, but I'm going to spend money getting smart on these issues. And you want me to do that because then I can advise you. So I don't know. That's a few thoughts on it.
Yeah, and it's good you mentioned that as well, because I think a lot of people probably rule themselves out of roles that they should be in or are really genuinely interested in, but might not pursue it just because they might not, be ready to deal with all the red tape around certain nuances. Thomas, what do you think about dealing with regulators? What's your approach?
Sure. Yeah. So I think what I'd say on that is sometimes we talk about going to first principles on questions, like what is the underlying thing that a regulator would be worried about. So in the self-driving space, public safety, obviously a really big one. In the healthcare space, patient safety is really kind of central to the core mission of the regulators that we would be working with. And keeping that as your sort of North Star is helpful. Sometimes we try to reason by analogy to help us get our head around new questions we haven't approached before. And so in addition to that sort of nerdiness piece, the curiosity piece, sometimes like coming into an in-house role with a breadth of experience can really be helpful if you're trying to think by analogy. And I don't want to overstate the value of that because that can lead to blind spots, but that can be helpful. So, I mean, there have been times when we're talking about one issue in healthcare and it's like, oh yeah, this is kind of like what we saw at Cruise, or this is kind of like what I saw when I lived in South Africa or whatever it is, or when we were clerking. And so that breadth of experience can be a valuable resource to think back to. And in terms of like how to approach regulators, I've seen different philosophies around this. And to some extent, I think it can evolve as a company grows. But the approach I've taken is the one that if I were a regulator, I would want taken with me, which is, we at a company like Forward, we believe we have a service and are developing something that's going to be really powerful and valuable to people. And we're not afraid of that or ashamed of that or trying to hide anything. We're trying, if we're speaking with regulators, we're trying to do our level best to do what they want and to meet that sort of core regulatory goal of helping patients stay safe and stay healthy. And so the default I usually use is, obviously honesty is non-negotiable, but then beyond that, just being very clear and very direct, like here is what we are and here is what we're doing, and not to try to play games or omit things and stuff like that. Because I think in the vast majority of cases, the regulators are just taking the approach that they're trying to understand what you're up to. I think what we've seen in both contexts is that because what our companies are trying to accomplish is so new, regulators are to some extent, one, they're very interested, and two, they don't necessarily come with preconceptions about how they think about us, of what we are. And so they are seeking education from us too. And so that, like, approaching them with that sort of, here, let me tell you sort of who we are and what we do, can actually be really valuable and facilitating in the long run. So that's sort of how I think about it. Others would take, I think, a slightly different view and just try to say as little as possible. But that's the approach I've seen work both in the DOJ previous life and at these companies.
One of the next things I want to touch on is, from what I understand, you guys joined Forward earlier this year or towards the end of last year, correct me if I'm wrong. And then, literally 3 or 4 months later, we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's now November 19th. We're still in the thick of things. We were talking earlier and, probably are going to be in lockdown, in just another week or two, who knows? So what's the pandemic been like for you guys, I guess, both on an individual level, along with having Forward really address some of these challenges that have come up during the pandemic? Matt, you want to start?
Yeah, I do. This will also bring into more relief the Matt doesn't do anything point. So the pandemic hits and I very quickly hired 2 lawyers. I promise I was doing stuff before then, but anyway, yeah, I mean the pandemic, who could have known? I guess many people knew and they pointed it out, but I did not anticipate it. I worked at this healthcare company and then it just starts going wild. And yeah, we've been scrambling. It's both from a traditional, any company has to figure out what they're doing with their employees and where they're working and things like that and how they're communicating and how they're keeping culture. So that I don't think has been distinct for us. It's been a challenge. It's been fun. There's a lot of learning. But with Forward as a business, it's been super inspiring. When this started ramping in the US, so we're talking late February, early March, there was this environment at the company of this is our time to step up and provide care. This is when we are most needed. And Forward kept its doors open throughout the pandemic. We haven't closed. We built this entire new product. The company is technology forward, and we had visions of having remote visits and improving our telemedicine offerings that we thought, just frankly, that like the world wasn't ready for yet.
Right.
And COVID made that possible, and people just stepped up. I mean, it was unbelievable in the span of a month, the things that got built and what services we were able to provide to our members. And to be specific, what I'm talking about is we like in 3 days built this COVID assessment tool. I think we were one of the first people that online you could go and you could say, you know, I have a fever and I have a sore throat. What does this mean? How high is my risk? And it's for all of us now, it feels like, oh, well, you kind of know not to freak out or you know what to do. But recall in March, like it was scary. And this was pretty cool to offer for free for anybody and to kind of give them a sense of risk and some ideas of what was available out there, of what to do. And then we took that a step further. We were one of the first companies to get tests, and we set up drive-through tests. You know, we were just, as a lawyer, it was pretty exciting to be, again, making things happen. Like, okay, how are we going to get this, you know, amendment to our lease to allow us a spot in the driveway? Who can do this test? Where do we need to store it? How are we protecting privacy? All that stuff. So it has been intense and fun, inspiring, and I don't like working from home.
Thomas, how's it been for you?
Yeah, so I joined Forward in June. So I joined a company that was already, you know, working remote, and we're both based in San Francisco, and so it was an onboarding experience that was great, but that I hope never to have to do again. What it was many dozens of Zoom meetings to meet people, not even to at that point really start getting to work, but just getting to know people. And the company invested a lot of time in that. And I think probably any company that's interested in the success of the people that it wants to join right now has probably been doing the same. And so, you know, we're 6 months in now. I'm going through a second round of those sort of Zoom calls, reinvesting in the relationships. And that's another aspect of what I've seen that I think has been really cool at the company. So Matt talked about the sort of external facing stuff and the rallying around the mission of our company. And I would just add to that it also takes just a lot of investment, probably for any company agnostic of industry, to try to keep that team cohesion for what's now been 9 months or something.
Where do you guys see this going into 2021? You guys have a unique view on this because you guys are working for a company that's trying to, you know, play a big part in helping people during the pandemic. So how do you guys really see this all playing out?
Let's assume that the administration changes over. So that I think that does matter a lot into how this plays out. But setting that aside, you've got vaccines that are looking good. Like just this week, we saw in the last 10 days, let's say, we've seen 2 vaccines show above 90% effectiveness rate, which is awesome and really exciting. So I think how that, you know, there's a crazy logistical challenge of getting those out and getting people vaccinated properly, sometimes in a series of 2 doses. That's going to be a big deal, but people are going to start getting vaccinated and hopefully developing immunity, and hopefully more people are joining in the wearing of masks, you know, the lifestyle of wearing masks. I think, you know, the winter, maybe I'm just like drawing off of stuff that I've seen other public health officials say, like it's going to be a tough winter. People have to keep the discipline, and I don't know what's going to happen with COVID there. But to like step out of just purely COVID, like what is happening in medicine? We saw telemedicine really spike. Everybody in April was happy to have a visit over Zoom with their doctor. And then it fell off pretty precipitously after that. People are still more inclined to see their care providers in person. But I think there's a lot more investment going into this space. Like patients saw the potential of it, and we identified a lot of gaps, things that could be fixed. And companies and investors saw that, look, we can fix these gaps, and actually this is a great way to deliver care. It can be. So I think we're going to see a lot of growth there. And again, on the people side, like people potentially being more in tune with and being more inclined to take charge of their health. It's hard to say if there will be permanent cultural change.
Right.
After prior epidemics, mask wearing became more common, and people would wear them if they were sick, regardless of there being an epidemic. I think it is likely there will be some long-term cultural changes. So at least in regards to being more accepting of health technology. If I can say something as narrow as that, I'm happy to say it.
Right. Thomas, anything you want to add in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just add 2 points. So Matt talked about telemedicine. Obviously, 2020 was a banner year for people in telemedicine, but we've since seen a real retreat from that, right? I think people did it when they felt that they had to do it. And then as soon as they could go back to their normal patterns on that, we returned back to earth. But I think what I'm excited about is the idea of sort of what we're trying to build and we're trying to grow really fast here is instead of having it be an either or, a substitute between telehealth, you see a doctor through a screen, or you go into a clinic. We're trying to build this cool thing that kind of combines those depending on, what patients need at any given time. Maybe for one thing, they want to do telehealth, and for something else, they want to be in person. And it's all sort of wrapped into a single offering that is just healthcare when you want it, how you want it. And so I'm excited about that for us. And I think that's maybe sort of culturally where we land as it comes to telemedicine in the medium term. And then the other thing is like related on the FDA front, you've seen a lot of emergency use authorizations on a whole bunch of different things, right? Testing and so forth. And there's just been all this public pressure to get things out, get vaccines out, get tests out. And it'll be interesting to see, especially since the messaging from the president has been, wow, this used to take 2 years and now we're doing it in weeks. It'll be interesting to see how that changes, in particular, the federal government's approach to some of these questions. Like, will they re-examine some of the existing processes and say, wow, that was taking much longer than it needed to sometimes. And like we talked about with startups, there's opportunity cost in not acting. And so that'll be sort of a theme to watch, I think, in 2021 and throughout what we assume is a Biden administration.
Right. Those are some great points. And one more question that I have for both of you guys is, what's your take on what's going on in cities like San Francisco? What's your outlook on what's going on in the cities? Is this a temporary lapse, or do you foresee a city like San Francisco getting back to normal at some point?
As a homeowner in San Francisco, I'm gonna put my chips in favor of it going back to normal.
I hear you.
I'm just biased. I can't. So someone who used to work with at Cruise, actually, I was speaking with them the other day, and they said, look, like, we think people are able to maintain kind of some cultural interaction being remote, but at the 2-year level, the people who have come in, they never had they weren't able to build up the bank account, so to speak, of in-person kind of working together reactions or interactions. And at the 2-year level, the ratio of those people in your company is, depending on where you work, like pretty high. That is just a different type of company. And most companies didn't start with the intention or the processes or the structure in place to be such a type of company. So a long way of saying, I think, people saw productivity actually go up in some cases when everyone went remote, but I think that's going to be short-lived, and companies are going to want to get back together, have offices again. So, and San Francisco and Silicon Valley will remain a place that people want to live and work. But again, a little bit of this is hopeful thinking, because I am here.
I'm in the same boat as you. I think it's really hard to bet against, all the entrepreneurs there, the culture, the pulse, that a place like San Francisco gives. Thomas, what do you think? Anything, any closing words you want to add?
Yeah, well, as a renter in San Francisco, I will take the contrary view. No, I think there is real magic in face-to-face interactions. And that's true if you're practicing health or you're building a company. I don't think personally that magic today or in the coming years will be unique to the Bay Area. So, I mean, I think my read on those trends is that you will see a sort of rise of the rest in places like Columbus, Ohio, or Nashville, Tennessee, Bozeman, Montana, places that have educated populations where some folks that work at your big tech companies like Google and Twitter have gone to work remote this year and have stayed. I think you'll see organic communities grow up there and persist. So there won't be that sort of monopoly on entrepreneurship that just was truly unique in the Bay Area over the last few decades.
Right.
One note before we go, this is something like there's this middle ground of fully remote, like it works fairly well. You know, we've managed to figure that out, and fully in person. But a world where everybody comes in like once, or everybody doesn't come in once or twice a week, I think is like a disaster. And that's, you know, in my head, I'm like, yeah, that would be kind of cool. I prefer to work in the office, but it would be nice, you know, once a week, sort of at my choice, I would work from home. That sounds amazing to me as an individual. For a company and, you know, working with a group of people and managing a team, that sounds terrible. So that's going to be really interesting for the world to cross that bridge when we get to it, which we're hopefully getting closer to every day.
Well, why do you think it's terrible? Just to piggyback on that.
Yeah, rarely have I seen like half in-person, half virtual meetings be successful. The people who are on the screen, it's just more difficult. And so I actually just saw this on Google Hangouts the other day. They have like a raise hand feature now. And when everybody is on a screen, you kind of all acknowledge that. But when you're in the room, whether it be AV technology or just the feeling and you're all working on it together, and then there's one or two people who are on a screen, they just don't have the same ability to influence and be part of it. So I think like at scale, things just get weird. You lose the ability to be as effective. So that's my theory.
Cool. Well, guys, this has been awesome. I really appreciate both of you guys coming on. It'd be great if you guys could plug Forward and quickly just go into how people could get in touch with you guys if they want to connect after they hear this.
So Forward we're a healthcare company. We offer both telemedicine, and the core thing we have is technology paired with doctors. So we're trying to make doctors superhuman, give them skills, and have a relationship with our members that is kind of continuous. So we want you to be able to interact with your doctor and be able to monitor your own health with the support of your doctor and our tech. And so it's like an all-encompassing membership where you can go see your doctor. You can open up your app and see aspects of your health. You can get your prescriptions on your phone. And yeah, we think it's a good experience and a great way for people to be more cognizant and in control of their health. So that's Forward. Thomas, what else? What am I missing there?
I'll just say go to goforward.com. Look at what the company is and look at the jobs we have posted, including our employment lawyer post. The company is growing, looking for lawyers and other roles, and it's a pretty cool place to work.
Cool. And we'll definitely make sure to plug all those into the show notes. And I could say for one, too, I've used Forward. I know my co-founder uses it, and it's definitely a game changer in the healthcare space compared to like what you would do without Forward. So last thing, where could anyone find you if they want to connect?
You can find me at Gipple@goforward.com and of course on LinkedIn. And I think we should also flip the table here and say, like, you know, what's the plug for Lawtrades? Lawtrades has helped us out before. We use them at Cruise, and from what I understand, maybe I can't say this, so you can cut it out if I can't, but I'm still using them today. It was pretty helpful. Thomas, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, so I'm tscott@goforward.com, also on LinkedIn, but we use Lawtrades to fill a really key gap that we had in getting ready for the California Consumer Privacy Act. And they brought some really good people to us, and were super responsive and flexible. And they helped us with exactly what we needed, which is why we're still talking to them today.
Cool. That is awesome, guys. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.